This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the easiest to use all-in-one platform to build websites or online stores for any aspiring entrepreneur. Hey everyone, so Sanji seems like he is about to awaken his latent genetic abilities, with the Vinsmoke exoskeleton coming into play, with Queen's sword of course completely shattering against him. Now, a lot of people are excited about Sanji getting a major power-up, as many had begun to feel that Sanji had started to fall behind Luffy and Zoro, and over the course of the New World, it did seem like it would be difficult for Sanji to keep up with, let's say, a Yonko's top commanders. There's a reason people have been complaining for a long time that Sanji has yet to get a really big win in the New World against anyone noteworthy, period. However, the source of this power-up, being from Judge's genetic modifications, is something that needs to be addressed, as this is a unique case where it's not as simple as, yay, this character got a power-up. This is a scenario where it is extremely important to break down what this power-up and accepting it would mean for Sanji's character, as well as a potential arc that he may be set up to have in Wano. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe, and if you have any interest at all in being an entrepreneur, having your own business, or just having your own online presence and building a brand, then you need to check out the sponsor for this video, Squarespace. So for those of you who know a bit of my history, you know I've had my own small marketing company for a while, and we've worked to redo a lot of businesses' websites. So I've used Wix, WordPress, Go High Level, ClickFunnels, pretty much any website builder you can think of, and Squarespace is by far the easiest to use of all of them. I personally don't usually do that much of the website design work myself because I'm not personally that good at it, but that's precisely why I found Squarespace to be so great. Because with Squarespace, the website pretty much assembles itself. All the elements you put together kind of easily slot into a really nice symmetrical layout, so it holds your hand in a way that other website builders don't. And you can get a free trial for Squarespace today. Just head on over to squarespace.com, and when you're ready to launch, use squarespace.com/MrMorge to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So beyond that, talking about Sanji, I want to make clear that I do think that for the logical consistency of the story, it was very important for Oda to introduce a power-up for Sanji here. We have a long list of Sanji skirmishes to go off in the New World that suggests that he should be having a very difficult time against a Yonko commander, and even the raid suit didn't exactly seem like a big enough power-up to take on someone like Queen. I think Sanji getting the benefits of the exoskeleton is perfect, considering a lot of his difficulties throughout the New World seem to have stemmed from a lack of physical power and durability. For example, Sanji's fight against Virgo, where we saw his bone begin to crack. That's no longer going to be an issue for him ever again. We have seen Sanji physically overpowered a couple times by characters that are not even Yonko commanders themselves. Obviously not saying Sanji was weaker than all those guys by any means, just that this has happened a couple of times, which doesn't really compare favorably to Luffy and Zoro, who have been out there pulling off ridiculous feats of physical power. So all in all, I do think that the type of power-up Sanji is being given is right for him at this stage of the journey. I had personally hoped that improvement in observation haki would be essential for him as well. Maybe that can still happen in the future, but for now, it seems to be the genetic modifications for a stronger body kicking in. So I like that it's happening. What we need to talk about is how Oda actually handles the character arc that needs to come out of this. So to be clear, the first half of this saga, the Versus 4 Emperors saga, was Whole Cake Island, an arc that was heavily focused on the theme of being yourself. It was an arc that prioritized Sanji as a character who was repeatedly criticized and challenged for the way that he is and the way that he lives his life. I've discussed this in past videos, but the idea of the value of being an emotional character, a kind character, a chivalrous character, an unreasonably honorable character, all of these things were put to the test for Sanji in Whole Cake Island. And ultimately, the message was that there is value to just staying true to yourself, a theme communicated not just through Sanji, but also through the character arcs of Pudding and Katakuri, with Luffy himself being a pivotal figure throughout that arc as sort of the epitome of someone who is never afraid to be themselves and doesn't concern himself with putting on appearances. an idea that was important to both Sanji's and Katakuri's storylines. Now, along with all that came the natural ideological conflict between Sanji and his father, with Sanji rejecting the idea that he needs to be anything more than just his natural self. So, to be clear, the rejection of Germa's enhancements and the Germa legacy is not just, I want to fight with my own natural abilities, not your artificial abilities. It was a clear point that was being made that Sanji as a person is great the way he is and doesn't need to be molded into something he's not. So that's the important point, not just, being a super soldier but still being a great fighter in his own right. It was more so symbolic of the idea that Sanji didn't need to follow the rigid values that Judge imposes on him and can instead succeed by following his own values. That's where the complication comes in. Germa's suit, Germa's enhancements in the context of Whole Cake Island, those ideas were representative of Sanji conforming to something he's not. And the fact that Sanji was physically human and perfectly fine without Germa's enhancements was representative of the importance of simply being oneself. So with Wano and Oda introducing the idea that Sanji is going to get those Germa enhancements whether he likes it or not, that now necessitates a character arc and a new, more complete message. So let's be very clear about that. This scenario does not work without the thematic ramifications of getting the enhancements and accepting the enhancements being addressed. Now, this is very exciting because assuming Oda is going to actually deal with these ramifications, and there is good reason to believe that he will, it does seem like there was some long-term planning around this plotline. For starters, I remember it was somewhat controversial when Sanji first put on the raid suit, largely for the same reasons that I previously mentioned, that it felt like it went somewhat against a lot of what was previously stressed in the arc of Whole Cake Island and Sanji's complete rejection of Germa and their ways. However, this raid suit moment starts to make more sense in retrospect, as it was just a stepping stone, a small introduction to the notion that Sanji would be taking on the full Germa abilities in full in the future. And at that raid suit moment, it was just not yet the time for Sanji to truly grapple with the idea of embracing Germa's powers in full. That's probably why it felt so glossed over that Sanji, spent such a long arc rejecting Germa and even vowed not to use the suit, only to so casually change his mind. It's because the raid suit alone was not the important moment of conflict. His actual body changing is. Now, more importantly, going back to the themes of Whole Cake Island, of being oneself, keep in mind that Whole Cake Island is really, as I said, just the first half of this larger storyline of the Four Emperors saga, defeating Kaido and Big Mom. So obviously Whole Cake and Wano are complementary pieces, which is why we are seeing so much focus on identity in the Wano arc as well. Obviously, Yamato's belief that she needs to literally be Odin, Momonosuke trying to fill the shoes of his father, even the idea of Luffy literally being Joy Boy and what that would mean for the story, the importance of simply being oneself and staying true to oneself does seem to be important yet again in Wano. So here some of Oda's long-term vision for the story becomes more impressive. It does seem like the themes of Whole Cake Island may have been set up for a similar thematic thread to continue into Wano, where Oda will develop the message further and complete it in some ways. And it seems like with Sanji in particular, his personal conflict of staying true to himself was set up in Whole Cake Island to be completed in Wano. Now, I am in no way going to speculate on what the full message Oda is going to come up with for Sanji is going to be. I'm just saying that the setup seems to be there for a character arc to occur. And honestly, an arc here is necessary for him. As I said, there is some shift in mentality or some way in which Sanji is going to have to personally develop to accept these Germa abilities as part of himself. As if it is simply glossed over again as a cool power-up like the raid suit was, then it is essentially throwing all of the messaging of Whole Cake Island in the trash. So there is room here for everything in Whole Cake Island to stay true, but for a new layer to be added to the message. And considering that Oda seems to have always planned this continuing thematic thread from Whole Cake Island to Wano, I have high hopes for what we will see not just for Sanji, but Yamato, Momonosuke, and even Luffy as well. On top of that, one very interesting aspect of all this is that Germa 66 has been talked about a lot this arc, mainly by Queen, but the fate of Germa themselves after Whole Cake Island was left completely up in the air. Right? Whole Cake Island, to this day, has the biggest cliffhanger of any story arc in One Piece history, and Oda has been keeping it heavily under wraps as to what exactly happened to all of these characters once Big Mom arrived. Going into the Wano arc, the Germa 66 were essentially a huge missing thread, and I think that's very important considering that Sanji's personal conflict with the Germa legacy was not actually complete, as it turns out, in Whole Cake Island, and actually seems to have resurfaced in a new way. So there is a second half to Sanji's struggle with his Germa heritage that he is now going to have to deal with. So I do wonder if Germa were maybe taken captive by Big Mom, in which case, even though it's a stretch, maybe we would get to see them in Wano again somehow. It would allow for us to see Sanji confront his family yet again, possibly after this whole battle, with Sanji now having also gained the Germa abilities. And although Sanji has already seemingly hashed it out with his family, the Sanji that comes out from the Onigashima battle, having fully realized his Germa abilities and his Germa blood, would probably have a different perspective on his heritage. As such, regardless of whether or not it happens in the Wano arc itself, I would like it to happen in the Wano arc itself, but regardless of that, a new confrontation with his family may be warranted. That could provide a sort of closure to this whole story arc of Sanji and his family, a way for Sanji to come to terms with it, and a final scene with his family to sort of wrap it all up. Again, the full message of where Oda is going with this, I don't know, but I do think the setup is there, and has always been there, for Sanji to have a more complete character arc by the end of all of this. And I'm especially interested in this because Sanji as a character is unique in that he rarely has character arcs or changes in perspective. So for most of the Straw Hats, and particularly the East Blue 5, you can regularly see arcs where they grow or change in some way. Sanji is a bit of an exception in that his whole character is built around the idea of living by a code, and so his struggles tend to come from his code being challenged in some way, him sticking to his code despite that challenge, and emerging ultimately triumphant in the end regardless. It's an interesting dichotomy in that Oda always punishes him, yet also rewards him for sticking to his code. Because of that, pretty much no Sanji fights in the series involve character growth. Whereas fights are often important moments or displays of character growth for the other Straw Hats, Sanji is just a bit different in that his fights are not written for that purpose. It's not like, the Mr. 2 fight was about Sanji learning to break his code and hit a woman. Sanji literally couldn't bring himself to do it, and instead, he pushed himself to stick to his code and find a way around the handicap. He left that fight with his philosophies intact. So all Straw Hat fights have their own flavor, and that's really Sanji's. You don't expect him to grow as a character necessarily, but you do expect a great back and forth fight where he has to combine his wits and his strength to overcome the opponent. Now, the Queen battle looks like it may be the first big exception to that rule, as finally Sanji is partway through a fight and actually having to deal with something that is clearly going to be a personal struggle, carrying some degree of inner conflict. And it definitely helps that Queen himself plays into this by knowing so much about Judge and his experiments and being made of cybernetic enhancements himself. So Queen provides a really good counterpart to make Sanji's process of coming to terms with his own enhancements more interesting. So if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe. And you can follow me on Patreon for my extended thoughts on this and all future topics.